Imagine a desperate billionaire, his infant son's life hanging by a thread. Then a humble waitress struggling just to make ends meet. What happens when their worlds collide? Tonight, we have a story that explores a dramatic what-if scenario. A whispered plea that could save one life, but throw another into total chaos. In a world where money seems to buy everything, one man is about to discover that the only thing that can save his legacy is a priceless act of kindness. This is a story about how a single hushed request in a midnight diner doesn't just save a dying baby, but explores what it means to be truly wealthy and what it means to be truly human. Brittany Matthews knew the weight of exhaustion like an old friend. At 26, she carried it in the slump of her shoulders and the dark, bruised circles under her eyes. The ache in her feet was a constant rhythm to her life, starting the moment she stood up and not ending until she collapsed into bed. She worked 2 jobs, 12-hour shifts at Rosie's Diner, a greasy spoon with perpetually burnt coffee, and weekend cleaning gigs at a silent, empty office building. Every minute was accounted for, every dollar stretched until it screamed. Her world was a tiny 3rd-floor walk-up that always smelled like her mom's lavender laundry soap. It was a world of worn-out nursing shoes, scuffs hidden with a black marker, and a bank account that hovered around $163. That money was already spent in her head, on diapers for her 7-month-old daughter, Rosie, an overdue electric bill, and the backup formula she needed when stress and fatigue ran her own milk supply low. Rosie was the sun in her tiny universe. Coming home to her daughter's sleepy smile was the only thing that made it all bearable. But the pressure of being a single mom was crushing. Brittany was kind by nature. She'd give a stranger her last $5, but her kindness was often choked by a gnawing fear of not having enough, of not being enough for the little girl who depended on her for everything. She was a good person trapped in a hard life, dreaming of a miracle she was sure would never come. Miles away, in a penthouse that pierced the clouds, Nathan Cross was in a different kind of prison. His was a prison of unimaginable wealth, sterile rooms, and a grief so profound it sucked all the air out of his life. As the CEO of Cross Industries, his name was a synonym for power, but none of it mattered. 4 months ago, his wife Catherine had died giving birth to their son Leo. The joy of fatherhood was stolen in the same breath, and now he was losing his son too. Leo was fading. The doctors called it failure to thrive, a cold clinical term for a nightmare. The baby refused every bottle, every kind of formula, from the cheapest brands to prescriptions costing thousands. They had tried everything. An army of specialists had paraded through the penthouse. Even IV lines were a struggle. Leo's veins were just too fragile. They were talking about feeding tubes, about turning his tiny body into a medical experiment. For 4 agonizing days, Leo had consumed almost nothing. He was growing weaker, his cries fading. Nathan, the man who could command boardrooms, was completely helpless. He sat in the multi-million-dollar nursery and stared at his son, this tiny piece of his wife, as he slipped away. The doctors were using words like comfort care, a gentle way of saying give up. He would have traded his entire $8 billion fortune for one single, simple solution. It was past midnight when Nathan Cross walked into Rosie's Diner, carrying Leo with a frantic nanny trailing behind him. He didn't know why he was there. Maybe it was a half-remembered comment from his late wife about the diner's cherry pie. He just needed to be anywhere but the sterile silence of his home. Brittany was wiping down the last counter, her body screaming for sleep, when the bell on the door chimed. She turned, ready to say they were closing, but the words died in her throat. She saw the man first, impeccably dressed, but with shattered eyes. Then she saw the unnervingly still baby in his arms. Her maternal instincts fired up. "Is he okay?" she asked, her voice soft as she moved from behind the counter. The nanny stammered, He's just tired." But Nathan's composure was cracking. "No, he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. Brittany's gaze fell on the baby. She saw the pale skin, the shallow rise and fall of his chest. It was a look she recognized from the terrifying early days of Rosie's life. This baby wasn't just sick, he was in serious trouble. Her heart clenched. Without thinking, she reached out, a gesture of pure maternal concern. "Oh, you poor sweet thing," she whispered to the baby. In that moment, under the diner's harsh lights, something shifted. Nathan looked at this tired waitress, at her worn uniform and kind, worried eyes. Then he noticed it, a small, faint milk stain on her blouse. For a man who had consulted the world's top experts, it was a shocking, illogical surge of hope. He was at the absolute end of his rope. All the rules of society, of decorum, of class, simply evaporated. There was only his dying son and this woman who had the one thing his billions couldn't buy. He stepped closer, his voice a low, desperate rasp meant only for her. "Please," he began, his voice cracking. "My son, he's starving. The doctors can't help. He won't take a bottle. For 4 days, he's eaten nothing." He swallowed hard. "I see. You're a mother." He glanced meaningfully at the stain on her shirt. "Please," he whispered again, the word raw and broken. "I know this is insane, but can you help him? Can you feed him?" Brittany froze. The world tilted. A stranger, a billionaire, was asking her to breastfeed his child in the middle of a diner. Every rational thought screamed no. It was dangerous. It was crazy. But then her eyes fell back to Leo. She saw his tiny, listless form, the bluish tint to his lips. In him, she saw her own daughter, Rosie. She saw the universal vulnerability of a child, which transcends wealth and class. The fierce, protective mother in her took over, more powerful than any fear. In that moment, Leo wasn't a billionaire's son. He was just a baby who was hungry. She took a shaky breath, her own eyes filling with tears. "Okay," she heard herself say. "I'll do it." The diner manager, who had a soft spot for Brittany, let them use his cluttered back office. Brittany sat in a worn leather chair, while Nathan stood by the door, looking like a man praying before a firing squad. Her hands shook as she took the frighteningly light baby from Nathan's trembling arms. She settled him against her, humming a soft tune she always sang to Rosie, her movements practiced and sure. For a long moment, nothing happened. Leo remained limp. "Please, baby boy," Brittany whispered, her heart pounding. "Just try, just one more time." And then it happened. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Leo's head turned, his tiny lips parted, and he latched on. He began to nurse, not weakly, but with a surprising, desperate strength. The only sound in the tiny office was the soft, rhythmic gulping of the baby. Soon, a faint blush of pink returned to Leo's cheeks. His breathing steadied. Nathan Cross slid down the wall and collapsed onto the floor. A sound tore from his throat, a raw, broken sob of pure relief. He covered his face as months of pent-up fear and grief finally broke free. A complete stranger was saving his son. The miracle he'd been praying for wasn't science. It was an act of raw human compassion. Leo nursed until he fell into a deep, peaceful sleep in Brittany's arms, his tiny hand curled around her finger. When Brittany placed the sleeping baby back in Nathan's arms, he looked at her as if she were an angel. "How can I ever repay you?" he asked, his voice thick. "You don't have to," Brittany said quickly, the strangeness of it all crashing down on her. "I'm a mother. I'm just glad I could help." But Nathan shook his head. This wasn't just help. This was a resurrection. Leo needed her. In that moment, he made an impulsive, life-altering decision. "Don't go. He needs you. I need you. I took a deep breath. I want you to be his wet nurse, a live-in wet nurse. Seeing the shock on her face, he rushed to use the only tool he knew, money. Name a price. $1 million for 1 year. $1 million and a place to live for you and your family. Whatever you need, just please say yes. $1 million. The number was so huge, it didn't even sound real. Move in with a billionaire? Uproot her entire life? Her mind reeled, screaming that it was a trap, a golden cage. But then she thought of Rosie. $1 million would change her daughter's life forever. No more worn-out shoes, no more fear. It was the miracle she had always dreamed of, wrapped in the most bizarre package imaginable. After a long, tormented night, she heard herself say the word that would plunge her life into chaos. Okay.
Moving into Nathan Cross's world was like stepping onto another planet. Brittany, her mother, and Rosie were given a guest house more luxurious than any hotel. Her diner uniform was replaced with a wardrobe of designer clothes. The anxiety about money vanished, replaced by a strange sense of dislocation. The main house was a cold museum of modern art, run by a silent, efficient staff who looked right through her. To them, she wasn't a guest, she was the help. The queen of the staff was Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, a severe woman who watched Brittany with constant disapproval. She left passive-aggressive notes about storing milk and muttered about people not knowing their place. The whispers followed her down the hallways, calling her a gold digger who had preyed on a grieving man's weakness. Brittany tried to ignore it, focusing on Leo, who was now thriving. Her connection to him was deep and real, but whenever she handed him back, the feeling of being an outsider came crashing back. She was living in a palace, but had never felt more alone. The Cold War with the staff was nothing compared to the storm that was Eleanor Vance, the mother of Nathan's late wife, a formidable woman carved from old money and icy disdain. She arrived unannounced, her face a mask of grief-stricken fury. When she learned of Brittany's role, her reaction was horror. She saw Brittany as a vulgar usurper, profaning her perfect daughter's memory. The confrontation happened in the solarium, where Eleanor found Brittany feeding Leo. "What do you think you were doing?" she hissed. "I'm feeding him," Brittany said, startled. "You are a hired vessel, nothing more," Eleanor snapped. "My son-in-law, in his grief, has allowed this barnyard spectacle into her home." The cruelty stole Brittany's breath. "Mr. Cross asked me to—" "I don't care what he asked." Eleanor's voice rose. "You are nothing but a parasite, feeding off my family's tragedy." Tears sprang to Brittany's eyes. Under Eleanor's withering glare, she felt exactly like what she'd been called, a nobody, an imposter. The gilded cage had just revealed its sharp, glittering bars. Nathan was mostly oblivious to the daily cuts Brittany endured, consumed by work and his overwhelming gratitude. But as the weeks passed, something began to shift. He started seeking her out in the evenings, after Leo was asleep. They would talk for hours. He told her stories about his late wife, and she told him about her dreams of opening a bakery. In these late-night confessions, the chasm of wealth between them seemed to shrink. They were just two lonely people bound by a shared love for a child. A new tension grew between them, an unspoken attraction. It was in the way his eyes lingered a moment too long, the brief electric brush of his fingers against hers. He saw in Brittany a genuine goodness he'd never known. She wasn't impressed by his money, she saw him. Brittany felt herself falling for him, but it was terrifying. Was his kindness genuine, or was it just gratitude? Was this a fairy tale, or was she just setting herself up for the biggest heartbreak of her life? The fragile bubble of their private world was brutally popped by a flashbulb. Someone had talked. The story leaked, and it was a tabloid editor's dream. "Billionaire's bizarre baby mama. Nathan Cross hires Waitress as wet nurse," screamed the headlines. Overnight, their lives became a public spectacle. Paparazzi camped outside the estate. Brittany's photo was everywhere. The public narrative was cruel. Some called her a hero, but many more echoed Eleanor Vance's view, calling her a gold-digging leech. The chaos was suffocating. She was a prisoner of the very fortune that was supposed to be her salvation. Nathan was furious, hiring security and threatening lawsuits, but it was no use. The whisper in the diner had become a global shout, and it was tearing Brittany's world apart. She had saved life, but in doing so, had completely lost her own. What would you have done in Brittany's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're moved by this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. The real crisis came not from the tabloids, but from within the mansion. One evening, Leo awoke screaming, a sharp, piercing wail of agony. His skin was hot to the touch. A quick check confirmed a 104-degree fever. He was inconsolable, arching his back and refusing to eat. Panic set in. Dehydration was a serious risk for any infant, but for Leo, it could be catastrophic. Nathan burst into the nursery, his face pale with a familiar terror, and immediately called his private physician. The doctor arrived within 20 minutes, his face grim after a brief examination. His fever is dangerously high, and he's showing signs of dehydration. Given his history, we can't take any chances. We need to get him to the hospital immediately for IV fluids. The word hospital sent a jolt of ice through Nathan's veins. But Brittany, rocking the screaming baby, shook her head. "Just wait," she said, her voice firm. "There's no time to wait," the doctor insisted. "I know," Brittany said, looking directly at Nathan, her eyes pleading. "But this cry isn't about hunger. It's a pain cry. Look, he keeps pulling at his ear. I think it might be a severe earache, and the sucking motion from a bottle is probably excruciating." She took a deep breath, making a suggestion that felt like a gamble. "The doctor is right about the risk, but before we rush to the ER, can you just check his ears? Maybe if we know what it is, we can manage the pain here." The room was thick with tension. The doctor, a man of science, was urging immediate conventional action. The waitress was offering an observation based on maternal instinct. Nathan looked at the doctor